Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013. In this section we're going to look at the use of tables in Excel, and the first thing I want to do is to explain what we might use a table for. Now sometimes when you're working in Excel you're dealing with a worksheet or a workbook which has a mixture of content, and it's useful to be able to define part of the content as a self-contained entity, almost like a worksheet within a worksheet really. Now I'm going to use a specific example here, and in fact this example is one we're going to carry through into the next couple of sections. So it's quite an important example because it's going to form the basis of quite a good case study about the use of many of the things that you've learnt in Excel so far. The particular example we're using is an invoice from a West Coast based plumbing supplier, and the invoices they supply are to bathroom companies, kitchen fitting companies and so on. Now within the invoice, apart from things like purchase order numbers, contact details, terms of business and so on, they have a little sort of table in the middle which is a list of the items that are within the order. And what we do in a table is to take a section of a document like this and turn it into a table which has an existence of its own, if you like. It exists as an entity within the invoice in this case, and we can work on it as an entity within the invoice. Now the first thing we're going to do is to create the table. Let's look at the content of this invoice here. We have a heading section for the list of products. There's a product code, a description, the units, the quantity in the order and the cost. Now these aren't particularly well aligned at the moment, but I'm not really going to worry about that until a little bit later on. I need to select all of the heading, any existing lines in the order, and then I'm also going to include this sort of total section here. Note the costs aren't currently shown and no total cost is shown either. So if I select from B20 down to F27, I've included all of the cells that I want to include. Now I go to the Insert tab and click on Table in the Tables group. Now that gives me a dialog to create a table. Now note that I could have typed in or used this little button over here that we used earlier on to select the cells for my table if I hadn't selected them already. And I also have a checkbox here to indicate whether my table has headers or not. My table does have headers. So click on OK and the table is created. I'll just click away and you can see what the table looks like. Now right in the beginning of this section I said that it was a bit like having a worksheet within a worksheet, and here you should be able to see that that is pretty much the case, because with each of the columns in my table, and note that I've chosen columns B to F, but I could well have other things over in these other columns on this invoice that are not involved in the table. But for each of those columns I've got a drop down and I can go and do filtering and sorting and all of the other things that we've looked at earlier on. So pretty much all of the items that are within my order can be treated as the contents of a sort of a little worksheet, and I've got filtering and sorting facilities and so on. The other important note, I've clicked outside the table. If I click inside the table, then I get an additional tab on the ribbon. If you look at the top, Table Tools, I have a Design tab. Click on the Design tab and I see that I have a number of important options. So let's look at some of the options. We have here the ability to change the table name. Excel gives it a default name which we can edit here. We can also resize the table. In fact, if you click Resize Table here, you get an option to type in the range or to use that little icon to go in and select a range, but in fact you can change it by dragging on this handle in the corner here. There's a whole set of table tools. One or two of them, for instance the one relating to pivot tables, outside the scope of this course. There's also a one shot here to remove duplicates from a table. And this one, convert to range, basically turns the table back into a normal range of cells again, which you might find useful if you no longer need the selected cells to be in a table. There's a group here that deals with external table data, where you can basically export what's in a table to an external file and use it elsewhere. But we're mainly concerned with the table style options and the table styles. And I want to start by looking at the table styles. Now, if you click on Quick Styles in Table Styles, you get a gallery. I'm afraid it doesn't all show on the screen here, but you can see almost all of it. You get a gallery of different styles. Now note there are many different features here. Let me hover over some of the members of the gallery to show you. In the top left you have the simplest style of all, which is the straightforward black text on a white background, so no fill, just whatever the current font is on a white background. And then if I move to the right, look at the next option. That shows the banding, and banding is a common feature of these styles. Most of them have banding. And the other thing about this particular second style is that the header row has got a rule above it and a rule below it. So many of the styles that you see are a combination of banding and the rules above and below the header. Now some of them also have one or more vertical rules, so if I move down to, you can see the vertical rules there as well. And of course these are called the light styles. If you go down to the next one, you get the medium styles, where there's a lot more depth to the color. That may or may not suit the style of document that you like to send to your customers if you're sending them of invoices with this sort of thing in. And then right down towards the bottom you get the darker styles, where everything is much more deeply colored. Now the option that I'm going to go for here is one that includes the vertical bars as well, and all I'm going to do is to choose that one. Now let's turn our attention to the table style options group, because we can also adapt the look and feel of the table quite extensively with this group. For instance, we have a checkbox top right here, filter button. I can very simply remove the filter buttons with that. Very useful when you're working on the content, but you probably would want to take that away when you were showing it to somebody else. You can also switch on and off the banded columns and banded rows. So we've got banded rows at the moment, but we could have banded columns as well. We can also emphasize the last column, nothing in it at the moment, but the first column, note the text becomes bold. And then we can also indicate whether we have a header row or not. And we also have the option of including a total row. Now if I include a total row, it automatically totals that last column in the table. So if I click on total row, that will appear. I have the heading total on the left, and there is a formula put in here by Excel for the total of the cost column. I have of course here already got this manually inserted row. I'm going to go for the automatic option, so I'm going to delete that row. That's a straightforward row deletion in Excel, and my table now includes a row that is a total row. Now you can already see that setting this up as a table gives you a lot of advantages. You've got the filtering and sorting that we've talked about already, but there are some other very real advantages in this approach, and I'm just going to show you one or two of them now. If you click somewhere inside the table, let's say we click there in the unit type column, which is column D in the worksheet, and then go to the Home tab on the ribbon and go across to the Cells group and click on Delete, you have some new options there. You have Delete Sheet Columns, for example, which if you click that would delete the whole of column D. But you also have Delete Table Columns. Now watch very carefully what happens if I delete the table column. That's the column that the selection is currently in, which is the unit type column. Just watch what happens if I click on Delete Table Columns. It doesn't delete column D, it only deletes the table column. So the table, as I mentioned a couple of times already, is like a little worksheet within a worksheet. You can work on that without working on the worksheet overall. So you can make changes to the table as an entity without making the changes to the overall worksheet. Now before I forget, let me just undo that deletion. And that again emphasizes one of the strengths of using tables in Excel 2013. And on a similar kind of note, if you look at the total row in the table, note that total formula there, it refers to the cost column without actually saying what the range is. It doesn't say rows 21 to 26. Let's suppose I want to put an extra item in the order. If I click on the last row and then on the Home tab in the Cells group go to the Insert, there's Insert Sheet Rows and Insert Sheet Columns, but there's Insert Table Rows below. Watch what happens if I do Insert Table Rows below. I get a brand new row, and in fact the total will still work. The total will be adapted to deal with the additional row, and pretty much when I'm using this invoice template, if you like, within Excel 2013, that means that as I add items to this order, the total figure here will be adjusted accordingly. But we'll be doing that in a little while. Now I just need to do one other thing here, and that is to show you about totals. We looked here at the default of having a total shown there for that column. You can actually put a total in any of these columns. So for instance, if I click in the bottom of the order quantity column, there's a drop down there that lets me choose what sort of total I'd like. Now at the moment I get no total. I could have an average, a count of the numbers, a max, a min, a sum. If I put sum in there, for instance, it would tell me how many items there are in this order. There are 210 items. This one currently has count, so that counts how many entries have non-blank values in there. I want that to be a sum as well. So I'm going to leave those two with values, and then the other columns I'm going to keep with none in them. Now there are a couple of other features of tables that I haven't covered here, such as features associated with validating the data that you enter into tables, but for the purposes of this course that's all you need to know about tables for the moment, so I'll see you in the next section.